Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision Fintech Views. This is Theo, your host for this episode. Joining us today is Alice Korngold, author of 3 books, Sweet Board Advisor, and speaker, amongst everything else. Welcome to the show, Alice. And finally, we get to see virtually and talk.
Thank you, Theo. I'm thrilled to be on the show. I love your books, Beyond Good and the Metaverse Economy. I love reading everything you write online and thrilled I get to see you face to face and have this chance to chat.
Yeah, same here. I can't remember was it Matthew that connected us? Oh, was it Twitter or one of those?
I
can't remember.
I don't think Matthew introduced us formally, but I think by following him, I then connected up to following you, and yeah.
And then the rest is history.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. Well, thank you, digital world. And whatever else is there, it's serendipity. Here you go. So let's talk about your book, A Better World, Corporate Governance for an Inclusive, Sustainable, and Prosperous Future. That's the last one that you released in 2023. And it's also the second edition of the book in the same title in 2014, sitting where we are right now, 2024. That's 10 years ago. Oh my goodness. Let's talk about that a little bit. In that book, the way you described it is that, it's a book that showed how companies can profit by solving global problems. And the themes that you included was corporate governance, stakeholder engagement, collaboration, racial equity and justice, and gender equity, all of those themes that we are very familiar with, but only the past few years. So you are way ahead of time, 10 years ago. I am very, very curious, how did you end up on those themes? And how did you decide that's what you want to write? Because, there are a lot of things that you can write about. Why those in particular? And that is like really early before any of us jumped on the bandwagon that you're in.
Thank you so much. As you mentioned earlier, it's actually 3 books. And the first one was published in 2005 called Leveraging Goodwill, Strengthening Nonprofits by Engaging Companies. It seems like every 9 years is the pattern. Then A Better World Inc. How companies can profit by solving global problems where governments cannot. And then the third is A Better World Inc. Corporate Governance for an Inclusive, Sustainable, and Prosperous Future. And they all came out of my work. So for 40 years, my entire career, I've worked at the intersection of businesses and nonprofits. I've built and run nonprofits and eventually have my own firm. And a centerpiece of my work throughout this time, not the only thing, but a centerpiece, has been training and matching business executives to nonprofit boards, global, national, and regional. It's a very one-on-one process. I say we work with each candidate till they find the perfect match, and that each nonprofit feels like, oh my gosh, we have this amazing new asset. And so it's really ushering a person on a journey to find the perfect board. And it became so 40 years ago, as you know, and as you alluded to, businesses and nonprofits were far apart. You're either for profit or for mission, and never the twain shall meet. And over these years, we've seen the two sides coming closer together, where eventually companies are realizing that purpose, which I would call mission, is important, as well as a lot of other aspects that are more similar to nonprofits. And nonprofits have realized that the revenue model is fundamental to success. So early on, what I saw and appreciated is that people in both sectors have a great deal to offer the world and are energized and animated by doing meaningful work. And so the first book, Leveraging Goodwill, is about training and matching business people to nonprofit boards and building effective nonprofit boards, and the case for companies as well as nonprofits, because back then nonprofits were like, business people on our boards? Not so sure. So it was really to help both sides see, oh, there's value to each of you. And then A Better World Inc., the first edition of that, each really came out of my work working with the two sectors. And by 2014, when the first edition of A Better World Inc. came out, I was really excited to see what companies and nonprofits could do by collaborating, and wanted to showcase case studies of companies that benefited and nonprofits that benefited by working together to find innovative solutions to social, economic, and environmental challenges. And it was a thrill to write it. It was like giving myself a master's degree, all the learning, the amazing people I met. And my ultimate conclusion actually shocked me. I didn't come to it till the last week, because although my work is at the intersection of businesses and nonprofits, my heart was always with nonprofits. And after I reviewed my manuscript a week before I submitted it, I realized, oh my gosh, only companies can really make a difference in solving our biggest problems, because they have a global footprint, vast resources, and market incentives. But they're only effective in doing that if they partner with nonprofits, if they are effective at stakeholder engagement, and if the leadership, including the board, understands that these are valuable opportunities for the company. But nonprofits that are my heart and soul in life don't have the resources, or that companies do. Government, well, I used to have to explain that governments sometimes don't work well together in different administrations. Now I don't have to even explain that. Unfortunately, we can't count on governments to solve our biggest problems. And I'll let you reflect and ask before I get into the third book.
I have a headache thinking about that last part. One of the things that is so obvious, or maybe it wasn't so. I don't understand anymore. I fail to understand a lot of things that's happening in the world. But as someone who is a digital nomad, and I call a lot of places second home, and as an immigrant from a different continent, as someone with family who have moved back and forth and ended up settling in a different place than the United States because of our inability to take care of our citizens, is so often dumbfounding every time when I travel. And I'm sure a lot of those who are listening in can probably resonate with it. I often get asked, how do you, as in the United States of America, do this? Why is it that your healthcare system is so broken? Why is it that, financial security is such an eluding dream for so many? Why? And yet, against the backdrop of it, we are the richest country in the entire world. So I have stopped looking for answers because it gives me headaches. I don't understand it. I'm hoping that people smarter than me can understand it. And I'm hoping that people smarter than me can write about it. That includes you, Alice. When you reflect on what you learned from the second book, actually, about what corporates can achieve versus what could be limiting for nonprofits and governments, and then moving on to the second edition where you focused on inclusion, sustainability, and those are some of the themes that really resonate. It should have been something that just resonated from day one, but I'll leave that aside. What's different when you set off to write the second edition of A Better World? Because you mentioned it's like a 9-year pattern, right? Between
That's
the first
right.
and second, it was a 9 and then another 9. How has the world changed, and how has that influenced what you put in that book?
Yeah, great question. So after I finished the first edition of A Better World Inc., published in 2014, people said, "Oh, are you going to write another book?" And I said, if I have something new to say, maybe, but I've said what I want to say for now. And then 2 years ago in the summer, I got a out of the blue email call from my book agent and publisher saying, so we want a new edition of Better World. The first one was kind of ahead of where everyone was. We feel like the world is ready for it. Do you want to do it? And what would you do with it? And the timing was amazing, because I thought, oh yes, I know what I want to say. So my whole life DEI, there was no such term, but has been a centerpiece of my life and definitely my career. Personal life, but also very much of my career. And again, heart and soul. And I said to them, okay, I've infused all of my consulting and writing, etc., with DEI work, but it's never seemed to have gotten traction. And I feel like now is the time. And I knew and wanted to research the case that DEI was good for business, good for economies, and good for society. So a very powerful business case. And to me, it seems clear that DEI and sustainability / ESG have to be a centerpiece for any company or institution to really maximize its greater potential for its own benefit and that of economies and society. So that's what I jumped at. If I could capitalize, all caps, the word inclusion, I would. Corporate governance for an inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous future, because that is the huge opportunity. And again, there are fabulous case studies. The evidence is powerful. And so that was that book. And another labor of love and another opportunity to learn so much myself by doing the research and writing.
That was what I loved about writing the books too, was it gives me an opportunity and sort of like forces me to
Right.
reach outside to different people doing different things, learn about them, because you learn a lot from people by telling their story. I often tell people I am not gutsy nor smart enough to start like a fintech startup, but I would love to tell you a story. I can tell stories, and you learn so much from I often call them the brave souls who would dare go against the status quo and start something on their own. I wrote down when you said the evidence, that's that word, it resonates so much because I think I have seen so many reports that try to not just qualify but quantify the impact, positive impact of inclusion, right? If you were to include more people generating for the society, you will raise your GDP up by X.
That's
you
right.
can lift people out from poverty. And it's common sense because there are so many challenges and opportunities in the world. You can't rely on just half of the population to solve it.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly. How limiting.
it's very limiting. We know it works better when you have more brains. So there's real tangible benefits. We don't need any more stats. And
Right.
that's the frustration part.
Right.
That we keep seeing people pulling back, especially the last year, 2 years. And they're like, well, yeah, it's all good, but. So we see companies pulling back. We see universities pulling back. We see people saying, well, we're not going to talk about DEI. We're going to call it, I don't know, something else, right? We're changing names. Just like what they do with ESG, which is going to change name. Some went as far as banning. Now, this is a bad concept. There are so many examples where I see real economic damage to it, but we're not going to go there.
Yes.
What are we missing? Are we going up and down the cycle? Is that is that what it takes, right, to actually get to where we need to be?
A big and great question. So to me, as you said, it's common sense. And if you can imagine to our listeners, in my hands, I'm sort of drawing a small circle saying, our multinational corporations, primarily based in the US, have focused on a very small demographic for hiring and for workforce and markets. And all around are people with disabilities, women, people of color, LGBTQ+, refugees and immigrants, people who have tremendous value to offer and who represent markets. And the data points that are, in the book, we're talking about trillions of dollars of opportunity to companies and economies. And then there's the social aspect. And it seems like the right thing to do, but also seems like the sensible thing to do. Why isn't it happening? I guess change is threatening to people. Maybe the big change in demographics is threatening to people. But I like to focus on the companies and institutions that are driving DEI and ESG and benefiting. And by whatever term you want to use in terms of DEI and ESG, as you say, a lot of companies are and institutions are changing, afraid to use those letters because it's like, waving a flag, but still doing the work. I think after George Floyd was murdered, it was a call to action to a lot of companies and institutions, and they continue to do the work, but not all companies had that degree of commitment. I'm not a lawyer, but there are new legal constraints on programs, and DEI has been politicized as an election issue along with ESG. But companies with true commitment to DEI and ESG, which all the evidence supports that it's positive, they continue their efforts. Maybe more complicated, maybe issues of terminology, but they are driving it forward.
Are there any examples that you like the most?
Oh, goodness. In terms of DEI or ESG?
Like
Or
ones
both?
that you say, look at them, oh, yeah, they're doing it right, and we need more of those in any industry. Because that's the part, I think I love what you say, that companies that have true commitment, they have continued the work, perhaps under a different banner, perhaps under a different way, but they continue the charge. I think what I struggle with is the optics, right? The optics of we're spending a lot of energy doing this, and then we switch, and that's why I make fun of companies that change their logo color for a particular month of the year, like, oh, here's Women History Month. All right, we need some women here. We need to change everything pink. And then, oops, we're done with March. All right, now let's move on. What's the color of the month? Literally. I would argue those are not true commitment because you're
Yes.
doing it
Yeah.
to kind of brush over it and say, oh,
Yes.
I did something, I checked the
Yes.
box.
Yeah.
Those that are truly, truly committed to actually doing something to do good, I think oftentimes you don't hear much about them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's my struggle is I want to lift more of those stories up so that we can feel like there's hope, especially during times when it feels like the hope is eluding. So I use, like, one of my examples I often tell people about is my good friends from SAS. They are doing a lot of things. They are advocating for, making sure that we are using AI in a responsible way. They are going all the way to, not just from the tech side, but trying to use the influence on the policy side. So there's a lot of things from what they read, what they write about, what they talk about, things that you don't often hear because they're not the loudest, but they are there doing the important work.
Doing the work.
I would love to see more of those.
Yeah. So that really is the point of all three of my books, is to showcase efforts that are moving us in the right direction, but also beneficial to companies and to economies, which is redounds back to companies. So there's no company that I could say, oh, they're doing everything right. But there are many examples of companies that are doing a lot of great things in this area. I will give you some examples. So Microsoft, as some people know, has a substantial program hiring people with neurodiversity. And not only is it an employment opportunity, but they create social cohorts. And these are people who think differently than us and bring different value to the table. And it's incredibly beneficial to Microsoft. But Microsoft also is creating products and services for people with hearing and vision loss, which is an enormous market now, and it will be a growing market as society ages. HP, similarly, in terms of products to make services more accessible to people with various disabilities. And HP and Roche, the pharma company, are making deep inroads into Africa, where the average age is 18 compared to the US and Europe, which is in the 30s. So the future demographics of the world are in the continent of Africa. And as a gentleman from Roche, whom I've worked with for many years and admire tremendously, he says people, countries, economies, companies see the value of Africa in the ground, but our real value is above ground. It's our people and developing that human capital. So Roche in terms of diagnostics for healthcare, HP in terms of STEM education, see the tremendous opportunities. So those are examples. Another example is I love Tent Partnership for Refugees, started by D.U. Lukaya, who founded, he himself, an immigrant, and founded his company's Chobani. And Tent works globally with hundreds of multinational corporations. They make the case for the value for companies of hiring refugees. And then I interview companies that work with them, and they will make the business case. And then Tent partners companies with local nonprofits in the communities where companies have a presence to facilitate hiring at a local level. And Airbnb helps provide housing. So that's a great opportunity. And finally, there are many amazing nonprofits, some that I've worked with for a long time, just love them. Perscolas, Girls Who Code, All Star Code, many that work with hundreds of corporations to help promote opportunities, education and opportunities for people of color in STEM careers, which are very, very lucrative. So good things are happening. And in every case, they involve partnerships with NGOs.
I like the partnership part that you're talking about and how you started that story in the very beginning when we were talking. That's something that I don't think we often think enough about, because every time when we think about doing good, we immediately shift to NGO. And there is a lot of benefits, as you pointed out, that corporates can do because of the footprint, because of, the resources that they have access to. I just hope that this will become a narrative of how we're supposed to run business instead of an exception. That's hope for the future. Now, knowing what you know now, 40 years, looking back, would you have changed what you do and what you've written, the path you've taken? And for those who are just starting out, what would your advice be for them?
I wouldn't change anything. I have loved every step of it because I've learned so much, grown so much, and feel that I've had opportunities to contribute. I think for most people, and certainly for today's younger generations, careers are zigzaggy. And for me, my advice would be at each fork in the road to look at your options and do what's most meaningful to you. That doesn't necessarily mean a nonprofit. You can do a lot of good working at companies and many different settings, government. Look for opportunities where you will be fulfilled and where you're not closing off future options, but keeping the lanes open. I was on a panel once for business school alumni, prestigious school, and there were 4 women on the panel talking about our careers. And I looked out at the audience and I suddenly realized something. And I said, wait a minute, you all think that we have these very carefully orchestrated careers to get where we are today. But at least for me, I just one step at a time. These are some choices. I think I want to go this way. It won't close me off, but I'll learn a lot, I'll grow, and I'll have opportunities to maybe do something good. And lo and behold, I've wound up here. And other 3 women were nodding and say, yes, yes, me too, me too. So we each find our own path. And I want to emphasize throughout this conversation, there's opportunity for people in every sector, in every job, just about every, to do something good, to advance the world in a better direction from wherever you sit.
And I think that we have the obligation to do that as well. There are others who don't have a seat at the table. There are others who don't have the means to do it. So for those of us who have the platform and the resources and the access, we have a responsibility to do more and to create a better and more just world. So before we close, I want to ask you, what gives you hope?
You know, you said at one point it gives you a headache to think about some of these issues. And
Death by 1,000 cuts.
oh, yes, I like that term. I mean, the condition circumstances in the world today could really be paralyzing. So we have two choices: to be paralyzed and just go into deep depression, or say, all right, can't solve it all. I don't know how much of a difference it'll make, but for my life, I'm going to do something meaningful to contribute to positive progress. A motivation for me, and I think for others too, is my children and grandchildren. I look at the world they will inherit with deep concerns. And I think the most that each of us can do is say, what can I do? And that action, first of all, that action brings you together with other amazing people like you and other amazing people I get to work with. I mean, I wear rose colored glasses because every day I'm working with company people or nonprofits who are doing such great things, and they become friends too. And it's inspiring, and we just keep going. You know, what can you do? What are the choices?
Not doing something is not an option.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's I do a cycle every now and then. I would go through days where I'm like, oh my God, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm gonna back up.
Yeah.
And then there will be days where I'm like, well, there's a sliver of potential we can actually do something and it's worth fighting for. And as you say, it's the kids and the grandkids. So I'm not fortunate enough to have grandkids yet. We started really, really late. But the two kids, if
That's
there's
right.
anything we can learn from them, is they ask, like, why not, right? Kids ask
Yes.
why
Oh,
and
yes.
why not. And somehow we just stop. We take it as that's just how it is. Perhaps we can learn from them.
Yes. Agreed.
That that's the one thing
Agreed.
that keep learning and stay curious and
Yes.
right, as you say, we need to
Exactly.
keep going. So, well, thank you so much, Alice, for your time today. I enjoyed the conversation. I'm so glad we finally get to meet, at least virtually, and I hope to see you in person soon, sooner rather than later.
Agree.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you so much for this opportunity. And it's a delight to talk with you.
same here. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for another episode of One Vision. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you all next week.